is brought to you by DABA, your most comprehensive platform for investing in African stocks, bonds, and managed funds. You can download the DABA app on your favorite Google and Apple app stores. This week, covering March 2nd to March 6th, brought several interesting signals for investors following the BRVM stock exchange. And even though the overall market index moved slightly lower, several companies delivered strong performances. Today, we will explore what happened, understand why these movements matter, and most importantly, what they could mean for investors. Let's begin with the overall market trend. Over the week, the BRVM Composite Index, which represents the overall performance of the regional stock market, closed at 411.44 points after declining 1.50%. The other major indices followed a similar path. The BRVM 30 index ended the week at 192.20 points after falling 1.34%. Meanwhile, the BRVM Prestige Index finished at 162.80 points after declining 1.23%. Now, this may sound like negative news at first glance, but in financial markets, a short-term decline is not always a bad signal. In fact, what we are seeing here looks more like a consolidation phase. In finance, consolidation simply means that after a period of gains, investors take a pause. Some sell shares to lock in profits, while others wait for new information before investing again. Another important development this week concerns trading activity. The number of shares traded dropped significantly. Around 7,142 shares were exchanged during the week, compared to more than 11 million shares during the previous week. That represents a decline of about 34% in trading volumes. However, something interesting happened at the same time. The total value of transactions actually increased. Investors traded approximately 10.63 billion francs CFA worth of securities during the week compared to around 10.07 billion francs CFA the previous week. Why does this matter? Because it means fewer shares were traded, but more money was involved in those trades. In other words, capital remains active in the market, and investors are still deploying significant funds. Let's now talk about the most actively traded stocks. Once again, Sonatel Senegal dominated trading activity. The telecom giant recorded about 2.25 billion francs CFA in transaction value over the week. To put this into perspective, when a single company attracts such a large share of the money invested in the market, it usually reflects strong investor confidence. Alongside Sonatel, two banking stocks also remained very active. Société Générale, Côte d'Ivoire, and SIB, Côte d'Ivoire continue to attract strong trading interest. Banks remain a central pillar of the BRVM because they finance businesses, infrastructure projects, and regional economic growth. Now, let's turn to the top performing stocks of the week. And this is where we see some good news. The strongest performance came from Tractafric Motors Côte d'Ivoire. Its share price rose 18.79% during the week to reach 5,045 francs CFA. Why did this happen? One possible explanation is that investors believe the stock had been undervalued. When investors identify a company whose market price seems lower than its potential value, they often move quickly to buy shares. That sudden interest can trigger sharp price increases. The second best performance came from Oragroup Togo. Its share price increased 13.33% during the week to reach 3,140 francs CFA. This movement highlights continued interest in the banking sector across the region. Banks are often considered core holdings in West African markets because their growth tends to follow economic expansion. As businesses grow and trade expands across the region, banks typically benefit through increased lending and financial services. The third strong performer of the week was Total Senegal. The energy company's stock rose 12.89%, closing the week at 3,285 francs CFA. In many cases, movements in energy stocks can reflect expectations around economic activity, fuel demand, or company performance. And for investors, these three examples illustrate an important lesson. Even when the overall market index declines slightly, individual companies can still deliver strong returns. Of course, financial markets also experience corrections. The largest decline of the week came from Solibra Côte d'Ivoire. Its share price dropped about 18.99%, closing near 38,705 francs CFA. But context matters here. Solibra had performed extremely well in previous weeks. The recent decline appears to be mostly profit-taking. Profit-taking occurs when investors sell shares after a strong rally in order to secure gains. This behavior is very common in stock markets and often happens after a strong upward trend. Now let's examine the bond market. Here, the news is more encouraging. The total capitalization of the BRVM bond market increased by about 2.67%, reaching roughly 11,785 billion francs CFA. This means the overall value of bonds listed on the exchange continues to grow. Transaction activity also remains strong. About 31.23 billion francs CFA worth of bonds were traded during the week. The most actively traded bond was a Senegal sovereign bond with a 6.95% coupon and a 10-year maturity. Nearly 932,775 bonds were exchanged for a transaction value of approximately 9.33 billion francs CFA. What does this tell us? It confirms strong investor appetite for government bonds. Why? Because bonds are often seen as more stable investments than stocks. They provide regular income through coupon payments, which investors can think of as periodic interest payments. For investors building diversified portfolios, bonds can play an important role. They help balance risk by combining stable income with potential growth from equities. So what should investors take away from this week on the BRVM? First, the market appears to be entering a consolidation phase after previous gains. Second, several individual stocks continue to deliver strong performances, showing that opportunities remain available. Third, the bond market remains an important pillar of stability for investors across the region. Now, let's look ahead to the coming week. Analysts are already identifying several potential opportunities across the regional market. Some companies currently appear undervalued relative to their growth potential. Others may attract renewed interest from institutional investors. These opportunities span several key sectors of the BRVM, including financial services, telecommunications, agriculture, and infrastructure. However, the detailed analysis and the specific stock recommendations remain reserved for subscribers. To receive weekly investment recommendations, access exclusive market insights, and reduce your investment fees, consider subscribing to DABA Pro. With DABA Pro, you do not simply follow the markets. You stay ahead of them. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the DABA MarketsTalk podcast. We'll be back next week with another update. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating, follow us, and share with friends. Remember, this information is for educational purposes. Always do your own research or consult with a financial advisor before making investment decisions. And download the DABA app on your App Store to start investing in African stocks, bonds, and manage portfolios through your phone and find other helpful content. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing your financial knowledge.